Welcome everyone to this second day of the IRDR conference. My name is Anne-Sophie Stevens. I'm a senior science officer at the International Science Council, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this first session of the day, which is going to look at the research agenda for DRR that the IRDR has led on for the past 18 months. In the next 70 minutes, we're going to hear from the key experts that have led the development of the process, and really look at the scientific framings and directions that have emerged, and discuss what that means for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration. I hope you've all had a chance to find the draft prepared for the conference on the IRDR conference website under the Documents tab, as that will be the basis for our exchange today. So first of all, a few words on where this all came about before I hand over to our panelists. This process of developing a science agenda emerged from a discussion between ISC, UNDR, and the scientific committee leadership, the IPO and CAST back in 2019 around the need to identify sort of future directions for risk science. And the aim was very much to have a forward-looking process to really understand where do we need to put our focus as an international scientific community to really meet the outcomes of risk reduction, risk prevention, and ultimately resilience building of the Sendai framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was also an opportunity to revisit the IRDR science plan that was drawn in 2008 to really look at how the disaster risk field has changed over the past 10 to 12 years, and also take into account the change in the policy landscapes with the adoptions of the major agreements in 2015. It's been very much an iterative process with lots of consultations, lots of engagement, and many of you have been involved in the framing or in reviewing the recent drafts. And today we very much want to present to you all the findings of this process so far, and really welcome your views on the scientific directions, the priorities, and the initial steps for implementations that are in the document. And ultimately, we really want this document to be owned by the large community that seeks to work with scientific evidence to address risk. So I'll turn now over to Colleen Vogel, professor at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg and co-chair of this process, for introduction. Colleen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I wonder if I could have the slides on full view, if possible. Thank you. Great. So as you heard, I'm based in Johannesburg and have been linked to disaster risk reduction work for some time. And what we wanted to do in the opening is just to give you some context as to where we've come from, and then a couple of, if you like, teasers to where we might be going. As many of you all, I'm sure, know, there's been a long history starting in 1989 and obviously exploding now since 2015. But the focus has always been on risk, but in many cases with different slight tweaks on the paradigm. So as you see, and many of you are familiar with the Yokohama strategy and plans of action, a focus on prevention and mitigation, moving all the way into more of a coping and capacities assessment. And there, those of you who are scholars in disaster risk reduction will know we've had a lot of work on vulnerability assessments, which have been quite at the core. And then you have the challenge of how do you scale those up into much more, if you like, national and global assessments. So there's quite a number of contradictions and also tensions that emerge when you look at the huge risk landscape. And that's what we've been trying to do in this process, and hence the great consultations that we've had with a number of you. But it's really now getting into the implementation space. I think everyone, whether you're a climate change scientist or a disaster risk reduction specialist, everyone is trying to work into the so what matters now. And that's really getting into the intersectionalities of this huge risk landscape. Next slide, please. So just a couple of issues that I think have emerged. For many of us now, the words transformations, if you like, big systems change, transgressive change, which is trying to shake the system a little bit, are now becoming very popular and in part of the discourse. As indicated in the first slide, the risk landscape is, however, very diverse. And the other word that's now coming onto the agenda is this notion of intersectionality, where you have social and political and cultural constructions of risk. So we're no longer only looking at it just from a technological perspective, although that's critical, as I'm sure you're going to hear in some of the presentations on how hazards are framed, etc. But increasingly, issues of values, beliefs, worldviews, blind spots, and the social cultural contexts are starting to come right up to the fore and are starting to become a key issue and set of concerns in the disaster risk reduction framing. And what that does is that for many of us, it makes the issue much, much bigger, because it brings in then you need a systems approach. You can't just do a simple reductionist or positivist approach. And hence now the flavor is that we try and include this intersectionality, bringing in all these different perspectives. But a key issue, the second last bullet point, is the risk for us as a community and for those who we seek to engage with, is that we may still remain locked into our traditional framings of risk. And if we do that, we miss the insidious daily occurrences of vulnerabilities, and then also missing the justice dimensions, which really run right through the interacting risks, the concatenating risks, the compounding risks, whichever way you want to look at it. So in a way, trying to be a little bit provocative here, what is the hegemony of science, whose science matters, whose knowledge matters, I think are some key reflections that we really need to be having, and hopefully that'll come through in the document. So in conclusion, and thank you for the chance just to frame a little bit of what's going to come, I think we do need a reflexive and a reflective approach on whose knowledge really is being prefaced here, in particular from a locally led praxis perspective, from the ground, if you like, up, which we all know about, but then also how do you then mesh and merge that with top-down, very strong international framings and reconfigurations that are going on at the international level. So with that, I'll hand over back to the team who will take you through what has been prepared in the document. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Colleen, for setting the scene and setting the ambition, the ambition of the agenda in many ways. So now we'll turn to the presentation of the agenda itself with John Anmer, Emeritus Professor with the RMIT School of Science, former chair of IRDR Scientific Committee and co-chair of this process with Colleen, and Ben Payne, Research Associate at Massey University and Lead Scientific Officer of the Agenda Development Group. John, Ben, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anne-Sophie. Ben, well, I've got the item up. Thank you. Sorry. Thanks a lot, Colleen. That was an excellent background and setting for the agenda, and also covers some of the points I will touch on, and some of these were, I'm afraid, also covered very well in some of the conference presentations yesterday. I apologise for losing my voice. I've been talking too much today. So what I will do in a few minutes is to provide an overview of who was involved with the development of the agenda and how the agenda was developed in a very general overview fashion before Ben looks at some of the substance. So the trigger for the new agenda was, as Anne-Sophie mentioned, the need to revise the IRDR science plan itself, published in 2008, so only intended to last for about a decade. So naturally, the IRDR community, which is the scientific committee, the International Centers of Excellence, the program office in Beijing, and the national committee, as well as the sponsors, the International Science Council and UNDRR, were involved from the outset. I think it's clear from the speakers and participants at this conference, especially, that it's a very diverse global community from the IRDR. To drive the development and compilation of the agenda, representatives of these organisations, that is the IRDR community, formed a core group with others drawn from different elements of the risk landscape, especially climate change. There are about 20 members in this group. Of course, there was a need and is a need to ensure independent external review. And to do this, a 45-member, approximately, expert review group was established with a wide range of perspectives. This group provided input on the general approach and philosophy of for the agenda, and also specific feedback. I mean, of course, it's never going to have all the perspectives we might desire, and it's always going to probably be people who, while we went out of our way and go out of our way to ask people to join the review group and take part in this exercise, who have very different views from us, they are still, I guess you could argue, not that different. So we did try to augment the review group with specialist expertise from, for example, Indigenous groups and the private sector, among other areas. Next slide, thanks, Ben. So they were the main groups involved, and numerous individuals. So the agenda itself was developed through, as Anne-Sophie has mentioned, an intensive iterative process with these groups and individuals. And there are others who drifted in and out at times. A series of discussions with the IRDR community and sponsors provided the initial material. This was followed by a survey, perhaps there were more, it's a while ago now, and further input from the IRDR and core group. We're talking about the early part of last year. And importantly, a decision was taken very early on to work towards, after, I have to say, some intensive discussion and debate among the group, towards a very broad approach to risk, well beyond disaster risk, well beyond traditional disaster risk reduction. This was prompted by the changing context discussed earlier in the session, ably set out by Professor Vogel and others. Just to remind us, perhaps, in part, this includes the 2015 agreements on disaster risk, which greatly broadened what we're talking about. Perhaps we'd all argue it'd be nice if it went further, but it was a major step. The Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Sustainable Development Goals, among other agreements, but these were perhaps the main ones. There were and have been since many reports from a variety of groups highlighting concerns, increasing concerns about global risk, its existential possibilities for humanity and for parts of humanity, some locations, rising inequalities and deepening vulnerabilities, environmental deterioration and social and environmental tipping points. So it can be very gloomy reading going through this material. The COVID pandemic does really illustrate some of these issues that form the context for our work. So these inputs that I mentioned from the IRDR community and sponsors and others were supplemented by review and analysis of the literature. Now, this is published as part of the appendices for the report, and I think will be published separately. Quite a lot, many things came out of this review, but there are three points I want to highlight here. One is that none of them will be surprises, but I think about one is the knowledge to action gap, which is perhaps what we are all most concerned about as researchers and as policymakers and practitioners, excuse me, is large and growing, which is disturbing. Understanding the complexities of risk is a priority and something of a struggle across the diverse field of research that underlies disaster risk reduction. And the need for a broader approach to knowledge, which was highlighted by Colleen Vogel, also came out strongly in the literature review. Now we've tried to take these on board as far as we can in the agenda. The knowledge to action, for example, is explicitly addressed in the implementation section of the agenda, which Ben will be talking about soon, and is also a research priority. Understanding risk in all its complexities, in particular addressing inequalities and vulnerabilities, is fundamental to the whole agenda and is addressed, I think, in many different ways by the research priorities. The broader approach to knowledge and what in fact constitutes the knowledge we use, and as Colleen said, whose knowledge is it? What is the power dimension inherent in the knowledge we accumulate and apply? We've tried to do this throughout the agenda, including part of the consultations. It's something like all the things that we're talking about in the agenda, I think, that need further work to take them further, to take them forward. But we've tried to make recognition of the diverse sources of knowledge and their value quite explicit throughout the document. In examining the details of risk, of course, we need to be aware that dealing with risk creates its own problems and vulnerabilities, its own risks, and these need to be acknowledged, and principles of justice and equity need to be applied. And again, we've tried to ensure that this is in the agenda. A series of drafts of the agenda were produced, or rather, I personally prefer the idea that we compiled them from numerous inputs. Each draft was subject to detailed review. It's a very intensive process, I guess I'd say, to really make sure, as far as we can, that we deal with each input faithfully. A reasonably full zero-order draft was finished late last year, and this was followed by further drafts in February and April this year, and the pre-final draft for this conference in early June. As an example of the feedback, the April 2021 draft received commentary from the expert working group, the expert review group rather, and from an International Science Council survey developed explicitly for the purpose, amounting to about 100, feedback from about 100 individuals in all. And we haven't specifically made written commentary on every piece of feedback, but we have on the majority of them. So it is a very detailed and thorough process. Of course, we couldn't have done any of this, especially the way that I think we've approached the agenda. When I say we, I'm talking about the whole agenda development team, including the sponsors. We couldn't have done this without the input of numerous people. And the groups, I've just talked about the groups, but the groups are comprised of individuals who really have given, in many cases, a huge amount of time repeatedly over 18 months or so. And of course, it's not over, because we're now looking at the implementation of the priorities in this document. And on behalf of the agenda team, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to everybody who's been involved in the process so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for this overview of the process. We'll turn now to Ben, who will present the agenda document.
Hi, everyone. I assume that everybody can see me and hear me. Yeah, thanks, John, Colleen, and Sophie, for a kind of clear picture of where the agendas come from. Kia ora koutou. I'm going to provide a sort of rapid overview of the agenda and what it contains. I guess, first of all, if we reflect on this figure that's presented on the screen, the rationale, the need to develop this agenda has been made very clear earlier in this session and also in yesterday's session. Speakers like Peter Gochman, Mami Mitsutori, Kunli Han set the scene beautifully. And then we were able to bounce off the incredible work of Jana Silman, Virginia Murray, and various others who highlighted the complexities of the current and future global risk space, which Colleen has also captured and synthesized so aptly in terms of the challenges that this risk agenda focused on. So in terms of the rationale, the first section of the agenda outlines the policy, the practice, and the research context, but also the process of the agenda's development, which John has covered, in a way that clearly underlines the rationale and the need for the agenda. The second part of the agenda outlines priority areas for future research. And then the third part of the agenda approaches implementation. And I guess this was in a way that didn't seek to be prescriptive in account of the space which we all work in being incredibly dynamic, but it does really want to show some clear pathways for action. So if we kind of get to the priorities, through the iterative engagement with the diverse stakeholders, 9 priority areas for future research have been synthesized from that process. So the first one is looking at understanding risk creation and perpetuation, and focuses on systemic and cascading and complex risks. The second seeks to address inequalities, injustices, and marginalization. The third seeks to enable transformative governance and action to reduce risk. The fourth priority area seeks to understand the implications of new thinking on hazards. The priority area number 5 seeks to harness technologies, innovations, data, and knowledge for risk reduction. Priority area number 6 seeks to support regional and national science and knowledge for policy and action. Priority number 7 seeks to support just transition and what might prevent a just and equitable transition to a sustainable state. Priority area number 8 seeks to understand what measurement will help drive progress. And number 9 seeks to foster multi-stakeholder collaboration for solutions to risk challenges. And just on that note, the priority areas are designed to be broad, to encompass the incredibly wide range of research and practice within risk-related fields, but also aspirational in the sense of needing to push current thinking further in terms of integrating with broad sectors and disciplines and practice communities. And we'll hear from some reflections on some of the diverse interests that were involved in this process. These broad priority areas are also aligned with the indicative research priorities, which are outlined in Appendix 5. And I guess my first takeaway or challenge from this session is to ask you to engage fully with these indicative priorities and provide us with feedback on them. They're not designed to be an all-inclusive list, but having kind of reference to those will be really valuable for us. So the third component of the research agenda is about pathways to impact and transformative change. So far we've articulated where the agenda has come from, the broad context of the agenda's origin, the process of development, and the priority areas for future research. But now the how. how will this agenda be implemented to actually make these changes that it sets out? And a key quote from ERG, that sort of the ERG engagement that stood out for me is, this is an agenda for change, not just the status quo, with the addition of some more scientific evidence. So the knowledge to action challenge that John so aptly puts became a real focus throughout the whole process of this, in terms of the literature that Michael Boyland sort of synthesized and developed a great literature review on, and that sort of thing. But to achieve transformative change at a societal level and transfer knowledge from all sources to policy and practice, i.e. action, needs to be much more effective than it currently is. And consequently, the section seeks to outline various pathways to action. So, for example, pursuing transdisciplinary science and multi-stakeholder knowledge co-production, enhanced emphasis on the multiple contexts in which the roots and expressions of vulnerability of disaster risk may be located, to enhance data acquisition, management and implementation, to encompass an emphasis on rapid social learning systems that are mindful of various diverse knowledges, values and belief systems, and to encourage collective and concerted efforts on capacity enhancement to reduce risks, and also a focus on opening science to bridge epistemological, institutional and strategic gaps. Whereas Professor John Proctor sort of highlighted as part of the Indigenous engagement process that for me as a scientist, sort of stepping back a little bit, we're really just providers of tools and other ways of doing things that can be led by others in the community. As scientists and practitioners, we provide tools that can help society deal with rapid change at all kinds of scales. And these tools can only be improved by opening them up and sharing them beyond the science community. So I guess that's where I leave my little presentation here as with my second challenge. And that's for you to think about the implementation of this agenda. The fact that it applies to us all in this group, and we would really appreciate your feedback on how to get the best sort of impact from this agenda possible. So with that, I'll hand back over to Anne-Sophie Stavants.
Thank you very much, Ben, for such a good overview of both the process and the substantive priorities that have emerged. So we now move to the second segment of the session, which is really about getting a conversation going around the document, around the priorities you've heard. Please use the chat function to share your perspectives, and the Q&A for questions you want to put to any of the speakers in the session. And I'll now invite the 5 speakers for roundtable discussions on the agenda. So I'll invite Professor Guo, Chloe, Maefa, Irasima, and Clarissa, if you want to join the virtual stage and perhaps switch on your camera. I think we can perhaps stop sharing the screen for now, and we might want to bring it back later. And the question I would like to pose to all 5 of you who have been involved in the core group and the expert review group, advising on the agenda, helping us shape the priorities, really draw on the scientific literature and other resources to really capture a lot of inputs in this document, to reflect on what your key messages or your take-home messages are from the document, and really, what's next. That's really the key question for all of us. And from your perspective, from where you sit in your sector, in your institution, how would you use a framing document like that, and what would success for our process look like? So I would like, first of all, to turn to Professor Guo Huadong, President of the China National Committee for ISC, who has been part of the core group to share his perspectives. Professor Guo, welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations for our new agenda launch. Thanks a lot for the excellent presentation. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I really realized, some new, thought about that. So in my several minutes talk, I'd like to focus on the 2 points mentioned earlier. So first one is about the new agenda. I really think the new research agenda reflects the combination of IRDR's experiences over the past decade, providing a roadmap for future IRDR efforts. The 9 themes provide guidelines that accommodate a wide variety of ideas and innovations. I fully support adoption of this research agenda. I also have some comments on the agenda. Within the framework of this agenda, I suggest a more focus on disaster risk reduction in urban. Rapidly growing urban centers present complex and involving risk scenarios for growing section of vulnerable population. As experienced during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, these challenges are highly integrated and their impacts on economic, social, and environmental aspects are highly interconnected. One of the solutions, I believe, lies in emerging technology and the new source of data. I hope that we can have adequate focus on digital technology, and it will not only help us improve accessibility to digital resources being rapidly developed, but also improve the pace of our decision support system for rapid and effective measures and policies, and help to reduce the global digital divide for DRR. Also, the new digital technology will also help advancing the development of risk science. The second point, how about to see happen next? The new agenda help to align the DRR efforts with other international initiatives, including United Nations, the SDGs, and Climate Change Paris Agreement, to ensure strong international response to these global and shared challenges. In the future, we need a strong cooperation and multi-stakeholder engagement to ensure implementation of this new agenda and significant progress towards more sustainable outcomes. IRDR has made great contributions on the development of the new agenda, and I do hope IRDR would play a more important role in the implementation of the new agenda, working with the relevant stakeholders. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Guo, and for highlighting the importance of the work that IRDR has done over the past 10 years, which we've heard a lot about yesterday, really being reflected and enhanced in many ways in the agenda we have, and noted also around the need to look at urbanization as one element. So we'll now turn to Chloe Demarovsky, who is President and CEO of Disaster Recovery Institute International, to share your perspectives on the agenda. Chloe, over to you.
Greetings, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you and to see my esteemed colleagues again. This project was so exciting to work on, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. Just one note, in addition to my work at DRI, I'm also a member of the Global Arise Board. So I work with the private sector initiative through UNDRR, trying to further enhance the cooperation and coordination between the private sector and this practice community. I want to apologize in advance if you hear my newborn in the background. He might decide to interject, but I will remind you that he is also an important stakeholder in future risk, so he might have something to say about it. So I was part of the consultation groups for this, trying to bring more private sector perspective. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I was able to do that and how I approached this process, because as we know, it can be complicated and to get the private sector and this community really kind of speaking the same language, even though they're addressing the same risks and sometimes have overlapping work. They often use different words to describe it. They talk to different people. They have different conferences, and so it can be tricky to coordinate. So one of the things that I did, because I kind of am a go-between between both communities anyway, is that in creating my own feedback initially to the document, I went out and I consulted with various experts that I know in the field and got their feedback on what I was going to say, what their hopes were for, what research would be valuable. And then I tried to put that into my feedback as well. The other thing that I was able to use to get a little bit more of a broader perspective is my organization, DRI, we do an annual global risk and resilience trends survey, and we put out a report. And so what we get from that is the kind of top risks that are keeping organizations up at night. What are the risk managers, broadly defined, the continuity and resilience experts at all these different organizations most concerned about? So right from the get-go, in terms of our feedback, we were able to integrate some of that information from the private sector that could then be applied here within the global research agenda. Feedback, and this is the trickier part, right? To try to get feedback from the private sector directly through some sort of survey. So we worked with the team, and they were very patient and understanding of trying to kind of find an approach that might work. We created sort of a very brief executive summary type approach where we put that which was most applicable to the private sector audience from the research agenda into kind of a short blog post so that they could read it and absorb the information rather quickly, and then put out a survey. This survey went out to the DRI network, it went out to a list of about 40,000 practitioners globally who are based in over 100 countries. And then it also went out to the ARISE network and to our listserv as well. So we were trying to solicit direct feedback. And one of the things that I would say is that it is difficult to get the private sector to respond to these kinds of things. I think there are a few reasons for that. One is just that they're not clear what their role is or what the value is for them directly, but also it's really difficult to approach the private sector as a single stakeholder. The private sector is a really diverse set of actors with a diverse set of needs and preferences. It's hard to kind of say that anything is applicable to the private sector as a whole. You really have to go by sector and by size. I would say in particular, even more than region, sector and size are most important to take into account to be able to address them. So I think it would be helpful to maybe in future focus on certain key sectors or sizes of organizations that we can get to or work with more closely. And some of that is done obviously through collaboration, especially on scientific matters with, say, the insurance industry. Like there's a lot that happens there that is broadly very valuable. A few things that I would like to touch on is that the way that the private sector processes and looks at risk tends to be, in general, and now I'm talking mostly large companies, how they approach this, but I'd say this is pretty broad across sectors, is that they look at risk and resilience design very broadly in terms of what could impact their operations and their ability to conduct business. So that might include natural disasters, different community-wide disasters, the kinds of things we talk about, hurricanes, typhoons, floods, fires, etc. But also increasingly, every day, more and more, cyber and IT risk is really important. And again, when you're looking at the resilience of an organization, the cyber risk component is not just about the technology piece, but how the impact on your technology will impact your organization as a whole. We're seeing huge examples of this right now in the United States with the pipeline attack, and then also on the largest meat processor globally. So we can see that it doesn't just have an impact on technology, but it has actual real world implication. So a lot in the private sector, a lot of the teams that are dealing with these sorts of things it's one cohesive team that's dealing with all of it. So that's the team that we need to coordinate with and cooperate with, and that we were trying to address their needs to make sure that they are reflected in this research agenda moving forward. I'm really excited about the work and the direction, and I know that we will all find it very valuable. Thank you so much for including me, and it was a pleasure to participate.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for your help from the start in engaging with the private sector, and also help us nuance that engagement, precisely as you said, around getting a little bit closer to what the real concerns are from the various sectors. Many thanks. So we'll now turn to Maefa Rondriana Lijauna, professor at the University of Antananarivo and member of the IRDR Scientific Committee, for your views on the agenda and what we should do next.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie, for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective on this agenda. Hello, everyone. From my side, I would say that this agenda is really very encouraging. Why? Simply because if we look at the points presented by colleagues earlier, we see that even the approach was so open, very broad, and colleagues were really making efforts to have the views and perspectives from different stakeholders, and this allow the agenda to be as comprehensive as possible. Of course, it's not really very, it's possible to address the priorities of that we could meet at the global level, but agenda really allows us to have the opportunity to address what are really relevant to the region, of course at global level also, but mainly at the country level. This is very important because we all know that the challenges are very different, for example, from the north to the south, but this agenda really allows us to address all kind of challenges, of priorities, so that as mentioned in the global agenda by the United Nations, to not leave no one behind. So this is really, I think, very important, and especially it open windows for collaboration, which is really also very important in terms of research, as also the means every country has is not the same. So this agenda will, I think, also allow us to work collaboratively to put in place, let's say, partnerships that really will help us to support the development efforts we, especially in the South, are making. So this is really very, very important for me, and I do appreciate seeing these aspects in this agenda. Also, one important thing is that what would happen next? Of course, we have in the past, we have seen many, let's say, interesting agenda, but yet the situation in countries are not always the same. Some development can be seen in some part of the world, but the development are not the same. So one of the main questions, based on also on the presentation colleagues made earlier, would be how could we implement this efficiently and can expect to attain the expected results, as it was said. It's not just a science research, but it should be for us really a kind of opportunity to really bring change to the world, especially in the South. So this is one of the questions I really would like to have some discussion around from the audience. How you could see the partnership, how can we collaborate together to really implement and attain the expected result from this agenda. So this is my perspective, and thanks again for the opportunity given to me to share this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And in any such exercise, there is the tricky part of providing a global framework and then really allowing regional and national priorities to be captured. And it's helped in some ways in the consultation process. We've had some very good participation across regions, but yes, exactly, the question of modalities and what comes next. I think we had a lot of discussions around the implementation section with very much that question about, we can't go too far in terms of really prescribing modalities of implementation, and yet that's where the crux of the matter is. So I think very important point, and welcome other perspectives on that important question. So we'll turn to Iracema Alcantara Ayala, professor at the Institute of Geography at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and former member of the IRDR Science Committee. Iracema, welcome.
Ni hao, good day to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share my reflections in this session. The Global Research Agenda on Disaster Risk Reduction is very constructive and special because it provides several home messages that are so relevant for integrated disaster risk management. For example, of the 9 priorities included in the agenda, I am very much in agreement with the need to contemplate the understanding of disaster risk construction related to systemic, cascading, and complex risks. Similarly and closely associated with root causes and disaster risk drivers, the agenda could not be complete without addressing inequality, injustice, and marginalization. This also leads to a very ambitious topic that is clearly represented by priority number 3 on the agenda, enabling transformative governance and action to reduce risk. Transformative governance are very, very big words. And from an academic perspective, one of the infinite dimensions to strengthen disaster risk governance is indeed transdisciplinarity. I strongly believe that one of the greatest challenges we have to be truly engaged in disaster risk reductions, and hence my take-home message from the agenda, is building up transdisciplinarity. And the first step to do that is ensuring that all relevant stakeholders involved in integrated disaster risk management understand what transdisciplinary approaches are and how complex and demanding is to embark on a process of collaboration that requires the integration of academic and non-academic participants in order to channel the convergences between science and practice. The messages conveyed by the agenda are so instrumental to bring together partnerships on which evidence-based policymaking on integrated disaster risk management is key to achieving transformative and sustainable territorial paths. Regarding future steps, as a member of the science and technology community, I think that this agenda can be seen as a starting point of a process that must be carried forward to support better connections and synergies among existing and future regional and national scientific agendas and strategies to strengthen the co-production of knowledge directed to policy formulation and action. In other words, we have a wonderful opportunity to start outlining the architecture of a post-COVID-19 agenda on integrated research on disaster risk to support regional efforts aimed at the implementation of integrated disaster risk management based on scientific evidence. Overall, what I am trying to say is that this agenda brings together the commitment of all disaster risk science disciplines to engage more widely with all pertinent stakeholders to collaborate in the identification, intervention, and solution of disaster risk issues of relevance at local, national, regional, and global scales. Therefore, the global research agenda should be at the core of the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and the glue to connect the global assessment and the regional assessment reports on disaster risk reduction. To me, that is the way forward that we must follow. Thank you very much. Back to you, Anne-Sophie.
Thank you very much, Iracema, for also strengthening the message on transdisciplinarity as key in a way to drive change. And that's very much the purpose of an agenda like that, and really how it can help provide a framework for engagement with non-academic actors as well. Last but not least, Clarissa Rios Rojas, a research associate at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. Clarissa, over to you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, it is a pleasure to be with you all today. I work at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge, where we study events that can bring humanity to collapse or to human extinction. Some of those events include nuclear war, supervolcanic eruptions, extreme consequences of climate change, and the misuse or unintended consequences of emerging technologies such as AI, genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and others. In the beginning, I felt very honored when I was invited to become part of the expert review group. And now, after some months, I feel extremely happy for this opportunity because it allowed me to understand better the profound goals of the Sendai framework and the work that you all do. But most importantly, because it really helped me to reconsider and to reshape my own research. For example, my favorite part of the agenda is the third part, pathways to impact and transformative change, because I see that here we enter a realm with many challenges, but also a place that requires innovative solutions for implementing the global research agenda. Thanks to our work together, I've been inspired to contribute to this section by developing more mechanisms that allow the co-production of policies in the field of global catastrophic risk. This year, for example, together with some colleagues, I launched the report Pathways to Linking Science and Policy in the Field of Global Risk, where we share our own experiences and learnings from our years of work in policy with different stakeholders. By the use of study cases, a guide to starting policy engagements, identifying the skills needed for diverse types of policy engagements, we aim to not only share knowledge, but also to reach out to other practitioners around the world, especially in the Global South, because we want to build a community of practice where we can learn from each other and become better and produce more impactful policy changes. Also, by September this year at CSER, we are producing a series of workshops where we will be bringing together policy practitioners, but also the global catastrophic risk academic community, because we want to create a better understanding between both groups so we can build common grounds and trust that can lead to actionable initiatives and co-production of policies. We will start with these two groups, but the final aim is to incorporate other groups as well, such as civil society and the industry. One of the main recommendations of the Global Research Agenda on Disaster Risk Reduction is to create more community of practices. And I believe that by having more academics, governmental, and industrial institutions creating these spaces for dialogue and understanding, we will be able to make this agenda a reality. I invite all of you to keep in touch with each other and keep thinking about how we, from our own fronts, can make this agenda go from knowledge to action. Don't forget to reach out and build bridges of collaboration, because together we can do it better. Thank you.
Very important message. Thank you very much, Clarissa, and for your help throughout the process. It's been very enriching for us as well. So we'll now turn to the Q&A session. So you're very welcome to raise your hand or post your question in the Q&A box. I've gathered two, I think, so far, which I'll share with all the speakers of this session, which really relates to the challenge of bringing knowledge to action. How can the challenge of policy lagging behind knowledge be addressed, especially in the global south? Who would like to take that one on? And I think the second one is also about really concretely, what does bridging across the research policy and action space, what does that look like, and how do we go about doing that?
Perhaps I can just say a little bit. I think that one of the things that differentiate some parts of the global south with what we are seeing here in the UK or in Europe is that we are lacking in the global south the policy brokers, which will be institutions like the post office for the Parliament of the UK, which is the science and technology offices that are like the mediators between the academic world and the practitioners. They also have, for example, these all parliamentarian groups on future generations, and through them is where people like us, experts on the field of global catastrophic risk, are invited to talk with these politicians. And this is something that is starting, for example, in Mexico as an idea that they want to implement this in the Mexican parliament. In Peru as well, there is a commission for science and technology now for the Congress. And I think that little by little we're doing this, but I think that there is also an opportunity for entrepreneurs and people that is working on NGOs to create these policy broker institutions, because it's very well needed. And even at the universities, where some universities have like technology transfer office, why not having a policy transfer office that is constantly thinking about what's the material that is being produced in the university that can reach the local, national or international policies?
I think I can add something. It's a little bit of a different perspective, but in terms of increasing cooperation and collaboration, there's no simple kind of magic key to unlocking that. It really happens, interaction by interaction, event by event, organization by organization. A framework like this can set some goals and some parameters and inspire some collaboration. But there's no one way that says, okay, we've done it. It happens over time. And I'll give an example, which is kind of fun about how this can happen. So DRI has a glossary for resilience, which we created instead of publishing our own and writing our own definitions. We decided to look for all of the existing glossaries and terminology that was widely in use already by our stakeholders, and then kind of rank the definitions and present the best in class, which is a strange way to go about this, but a very private sector kind of way, I think. But that was the only way that I was able to find UNDRR and all of the work that you do, because there's not a lot of overlap with our community, or there wasn't traditionally. So this was about back in 2013 or so. And so it was the word resilience that enabled me to find this work, because a lot of the terminology is very, very different. So even though a lot of the themes that are being worked on, the terminology simply is a roadblock to further cooperation between these various stakeholders. And I actually presented that glossary and that research and that story at the IRDR in Davos in 2014. And it was because Virginia Murray, who I believe is with us today, was in my room, that she then sort of brought me on this ride and got me more involved in terminology at UNDRR. And so that's really how it happens, right? It's individuals following their curiosity, reaching out to each other, collaborating at events, getting involved. again and again over time. And the more of that we have, the stronger we can be, because we will have started to integrate our communities of practice. So I would encourage people to reach out to each other, to talk to people, to ask questions, to follow your curiosity, but also to use simple language, right? Simple language is really important, because otherwise we might miss something. We might exclude people by being too kind of experty, and we get really into our research in our field and our practice. But I think it's really beneficial to find ways to communicate these ideas as simply as possible so that we can reach out more broadly.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for that insight. We have a hand up from Rashid Khan. Would you like to come forward? Rashid?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. My name is Rashid Khan. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. I'm the founder and CEO of Evacuation. My question is about the IRDR's future initiatives in relation to the frameworks development. So what happened in the developed institutions, I have worked in few, the policies are very well implemented, especially in the risk space. And they really cover the physical risk as well as, because I'm from Australia, so we see a lot of climate change and kind of disasters happening. So some of the institutions are very well prepared in that manner. Is there a framework under IRDR where we can learn from these institutions, like their experiences, how they handled all those disasters within their framework, and we can learn and implement into other institutions and countries?
Thank you, Rashid. I think that's possibly a question to Chun-Li. I would say that the community of ICOE's national committees is very much designed as a sort of peer learning across communities. But perhaps Chun-Li, you're perhaps best placed to answer that question. Chun-Li?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry for the delay. Yes, this is a good question. In fact, well, there's no, how to say, one individual institution is designated for such a role. The IRDR community is very much a network. It's a community of individual researchers, scientific committee, and each member are a leading scientist in the field of DRR. There are 17 international centers of excellence, and there are 13 national committees of IRDR. Then, of course, there's a large group of 164 young scientists. So the how to say, the policy, the exchange on the policy aspect are very much done through the scientific committee meetings, through the exchange between the IRDR community members by sharing their publications, sharing their training courses and the cases. So this is the way it is organized now. And as you see that we have this IRDR compilation 2010-2020, which is also served for that purpose, to get kind of a togetherness for the achievement, lessons learned, and how to interact with the policy side. There are several policy instruments that is developed under IRDR for each GP. Every 2 years, there will be several policy papers developed by the IRDR community. And we also have IRDR working paper series under IPO. That is specifically for addressing the new issues in DRR, particularly related with policy issues. I guess this is what we have now, but we would like to welcome any advice from the colleagues for the future enhancement. Thank you, Anne-Sophie.
Thank you, Chun-Li. I'll turn to Professor Guo, and then we will wrap up the session. Professor Guo.
I really support, the Chinese idea. Each country is a national committee. It's very useful. For example, China, we have the China National Committee. Every year we have a twice meeting. I think we can share a lot of ideas. Communication is very important. It's a very good platform. But also idea, set up a lot of, ICOE. ICOE, I think, is the two rules. The first one is the local point. The second one is some field point center. The center, just focus on the different kind of the disaster, like the earthquake, like the storm, like flood and the drought. People can do integrated, study. Just focus on this center. Anyway, I really think, ideas, the very successful experience set up the national committee and the ICOE is really useful. I do suggest that in the next step in the future, we can keep this mechanism. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Guo. So to close the session, I'll first turn to Colleen to give us some reflection on the discussion we've had, and then we'll hear from Genti from UNDR. Colleen?
Yep, thank you very, very much. And it was really a very rich discussion, and I appreciate, and I'm sure the team will appreciate everything that has been said. We're obviously dealing with a very complex, wicked set of challenges, and to find simple solutions, I think, is going to be a problem. But I just wanted to focus on one issue that came out in some of the questions, which we never got a chance to address. There was a question by Marco Joel talking about the hegemony of science, and how that then also linked onto a question that was raised by a gentleman or a lady called Schumer, about the perception that there might be increasing, she sees, or they see an increasing gap between communities of where disasters might have huge impacts and the so-called scientific expertise. And that then links back to Erasima's point, where she pulled out of the priorities transformative governance. And for me, I think we're coming to a turning point, those of us who've been involved in science and then action and policy. And it links back also to the point that was made around business. There isn't just one single sector. You need to bring in multiple sectors. So for me, I think a huge challenge going forward is there a time to reflect on the architectures of how we set up these big panels, these big committees, and who's at the table, whose voices are there, how do you link in more Southern perspectives, et cetera, and this then goes to the methodologies or approaches, which is transdisciplinarity. So I think the inputs around policy brokerage, being humble brokers, I think that raises some interesting, again, architectures of how do you set up the next rounds of science, policy, and in particular, practice. How do we bring the practice voice to the table? So, for example, where I work, we're trying to really work with young change agents, bringing the youth whose voices are really becoming more explicit. How do you value and bring in civic society who has huge inputs in knowledge, et cetera, and then obviously the business perspective. But that then requires a whole set of new skills that need to be learned and how you do that. So I wish I could, say, I think this is going to go forward and we'll have a wonderful, easy road ahead. But I think it's actually in those challenging interfaces and in those contradictions where I think we might find ways forward. So I'm not sure that I'm giving you all a nice, here's the way forward and the pathways, which I don't think was the intention, but rather to just keep on provoking us to think around some of those issues. So I hope that was useful, because I think many of the inputs that were coming were around these tensions: science expertise, which is critical, data, which is critical, technology, which is critical, but then counterbalanced against some of the other types of knowledge forms. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Colleen. We expect nothing less from you than provocation. So thank you for that. To close the session, very warm welcome to Genti Kirschwood, Chief of the Global Risk Analysis and Reporting Section at UNDR, and very involved in the process. Genti, welcome.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie, for the introduction. And I'll keep my remarks brief, but also I just would like to start so much by congratulating IRDR and the whole team, I think, on what is an incredibly interesting tool and asset for accelerating implementation of Sendai. I would first of all really like to thank the whole team. I mean, I think you're too many to mention my name, but Quinley at IRDR, obviously John, Colleen, Anne-Sophie, and Ben, I think, who's had the enviable challenge of pulling this all together. But I think that what I wanted to really stress here is that I really do believe that this is not about the document. It's about a process and about encouraging new ways of thinking, looking holistically at the issues of how we better accelerate Sendai implementation, how we look at more systemic and cascading impacts of risks, but also how we look at new ways of collaborating and bringing scientific knowledge to combine with new ways of learning, different methods, different ways of consulting, bringing in indigenous knowledge. And I hope that what people take from this discussion is that the document itself, I think, is inclusive, it's useful, it's very aligned in some of the broader thinking that we need to be able to manage the complex risks of today. But I hope it also is an inspiration, and it's a starting point for new forms of collaboration and innovation and thinking that can create that next generation of risk management solutions that will be constantly evolving. It's not about a right or wrong way of doing DRR, as I think you've often heard Mami Misatori, our SRSG, say. DRR is everybody's business. So the perspectives of the modelers, the perspectives of the engineering community, the perspective of the custodians of indigenous knowledge, they all have a role in helping us understand and better manage risk. And I'm very excited to see that so beautifully reflected in the research agenda. And I loved some of the points that came out from the private sector representatives about, you know, we're happy to be here, but you need to speak a language we can understand. It needs to be accessible to us. I also love to hear about seeing opportunities for different kinds of collaboration and looking across disciplines and really thinking how this knowledge can become action, and how we can get over some of these roadblocks around terminologies to instead start looking at where there are synergies and opportunities for collaboration. And finally, I just, in addition to congratulating everyone and really appreciating the wide consultations and dialogues that went in here, I also just wanted to say that on behalf of UNDRR, we see this very much as a beginning, not an ending. And we hope very much to continue this deep collaboration with IRDR, with ISC, and with all of the partners and all of the contributors to the conference, as well as the cast and the overall community, in really bringing this research agenda to fruition as a tool, not as a single reference point, but hopefully as a source of inspiration as we move forward into this next half of Sendai implementation that can inspire innovation, can create synergies, and can help hopefully achieve and accelerate the achievement not only of Sendai, but of course of that wider community of agreements in Paris and also in the SDGs. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much and greatly appreciate the session and everybody's contributions, and look forward, I hope, to continuing on this journey with you all.
Thank you very much, Genti, and thank you to all the panelists and all of you for joining us. So we'll now close this session, and I believe the next session, which will continue the conversation on the research agenda, will start in a few minutes. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Anne-Sophie. Thank you for Genti. Thank you for everyone for the successful, very fruitful session. We will have a short break, 3 minutes, and then we will have a following session. Thank you very much. Hello, Dr. Wilson Lee.
Yes.
Good evening. And Dr. Rienti. I think we can start. We are just right on time. So, Dr. Rienti and Dr. Wilson Lee, you have the moderation role now. Thank you very much. We hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good evening. Welcome to the main section 3. The title of the section is Insight and Reflection on Global Research Agenda on DR and Implementation. I'm Wilson. I'm the IRDR scientific member. I think my job is quite different from most of participants today.
Wilson,
actually,
you are in mute.
I'm on mute now. Yeah, can you hear me? Good. Yes, actually, my real job is disaster manager for 17 years, but I have long relationship with IRDR. Start from the 2009, first time I met Gordon McBean, the former Icoe president. At that time, he was promoting IRDR initiative. I asked him why IRDR. He told me after decade effort on DRR, he thinks the two things missing. First, interdisciplinary collaboration, especially social science and the nature science. Second thing, last mile implementation. He hoped to build a bridge from research community to disaster manager and even to emergency responder. So I joined many IRDR activity, like the forensic investigation, like the data group, write some report, join some activity with the young researcher. I think I am rewarded from joining IRDR. Even last week, I joined the Japan National Committee member, talking about online synthesis and facilitator. Then I realized I should change the title of my job from disaster manager to scientific disaster manager, because look at my job, I bring scientific evidence for decision maker and the general public. So I think IRDR provide many knowledge. I will call it kind of the DR knowledge supermarket from each ICOE. You can find very useful knowledge and experience for implement DRR. In the coming section, we have 6 reports from the ICOE, from the National Committee, and also from the partner with the IRDR International Organization. As the moderator for the section, I will announce the route for the coming section. I will give each speaker for 10 minutes. And at the end of the last 1 minute, I will remind speaker about 1 minute left. Then we will have the discussion later, hosted by Rienti. So right now we move to the sharing by the first one, ICOE for Risk Education and Learning Africa. I think Director Nico Elema will share point of view from Africa about capacity building part. Director Nico Elema, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to confirm if you can hear me and if you can see my presentation on the screen.
Yes, clear.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much for the opportunity and also for keeping an eye on the clock. You know, when you start talking about this very interesting topic, one can quickly drift away. So my name is Nico Elema. I'm the director of the Peri Peri U Network, which is an abbreviation for the Partners Enhancing Resilience for People Exposed to Risk. And we run the Secretariat from Stellenbosch University. I have about 5 or 6 slides that I just want to quickly run through and which can also provide context to the presentation. So I think first of all, of providing perspectives from Africa, I think this slide is fairly well known, but I often bring it up just to remind ourselves of the enormity and the context and the extent of the African continent. Often, we can very easily fit in China, in Central and Southern Africa. Even the United States easily fits in the northern West Africa of the continent. And if you consider that the UK is as large as Madagascar, it really provides us the context that it's a very large continent and with a lot of dynamics and which we speak to. So further in the presentation, we run the Secretariat, and the network itself, the Peri-Peri network, is a network of 12 universities across the continent, trying to tap into these regional expertise and regional uniqueness of the continent. And since 2019, we run the Secretariat of the Peri-Peri network within Stellenbosch University here in South Africa. But the network has been going for quite a number of years. It's been 15, 16 years. So there's a vast amount of knowledge, vast amount of experience that has been developed over the years. And then quite recently, and I think more and more comments were earlier made about knowledge brokers and intermediaries, and we play this role also with regards to the network. Just again, framing the work that the network and especially the institutions on the continent do, and then how it can feed and how it feeds into the IRDR agenda, the global agenda. So we focus our activities on these 5 focus areas, which are obviously aligned with the 4 areas of the Sendai framework. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into every one in detail, but I think the slides are fairly self-explanatory. So just coming back to the agenda and the perspectives, we've heard a lot of comments earlier about the process, and I think Jenti Kirschwood really summed it up well. It's not about the document, it's about the process, and being part of the process also enabled the African perspective to filter through and to really align with what our priorities are and what we see the priorities in the regions are based on local knowledge and experience. So we did have a workshop and with all these contributors giving perspectives and giving input on the agenda. And I think significantly, and it speaks to the larger agenda and the larger objectives as well, is that within the continent, we have a lot of structures already in place. Within the African Union, we've got the Africa Science and Technology Advisory Group. There are these structures which many of the role players tap into, such as the UNDRR, the World Bank, and so forth. And we all make contributions to these platforms and these structures. So these colleagues made contributions, and I'm just briefly, this is one of my last slides, just want to highlight some of the outcomes of it. So yes, of course, global, there is a very big need for global, regional, and then national risks. As I indicated in the opening slide, the continent is quite extensive. And on a national level and on a regional level, one really need to focus to bring these perspectives to home. And yes, there is a recognition that climate change and the resilience around that really needs to be addressed, and we need to cope with that within the African risk context. Of course, global change and global resilience or climate resilience is a global topic, but it's really affecting the continent itself. But there are factors that perpetuate the risk landscape. Poor risk governance. We've had comments earlier around that as well, and we really need to strengthen and provide solutions around that. Social and political instability. It's common knowledge, in our continent, but also beyond. There are other global social and political instabilities that affect us as well, and the way that we need to operate within the continent. Economic and development fragility. For example, I list later the volcano in Iceland a few years ago, and how that affected flour exports from Kenya, and how it affected the economies, and in a sense also contributed to that. So it's not just on a local level, but also on a global space where we find that the risks really affect us. Global crises and stresses, and there I've mentioned the COVID-19, that needs no explanation. But I think there were a lot of good that came out of COVID, along with the massive, massive disaster and all the changes that we all had to cope with. So yes, it is important that we focus on addressing these issues within the framework. So raising research capacity, it's very important. Conducting locally relevant research, the contextualizing is one of our major opportunities that we have to tap into, and also policy relevant research. And there has been comments around it, but I think given the structures that we have, we can really address this. And so I think this last slide really speaks to the now what, how can we move forward? It is important, and it's been discussed quite at length, quite a few times, that scientists and researchers need to translate their findings into citizen and decision makers' language. We know that, and there's a lot of effort, around it. We should engage with policymakers concerning the implementations of science into practice. Something I personally believe in very strongly is productive interactions. So it's not just at the end of the research, but along the research process, you engage decision makers, so that at the end of the day, when you come up with solutions, you are actually already have the policymakers and decision makers part of the process, and it's a lot easier to translate such knowledge. And then also strengthening and expand on the North-South collaboration, but also South-South collaboration. It's important that we build and strengthen those capacities. And then also capacity among local researchers and training institutions. I've indicated the Peri-Peri-U partners earlier, but there are a lot of institutions across the continent that focus on disaster risk reduction and the field, and that have knowledge and experience in that. So as last 4 comments, I think there's always a need for more data, more base data, such as hydromet data, hydrological data, geographical, demographics, and so forth, but also disaster data. The moment disasters occur, that we are able to respond and we can actually build knowledge around that. Indigenous knowledge, it's been mentioned earlier in some of the conversations as well. There's a wealth of indigenous knowledge and how to respond to disasters that lie within the continent. Research and capacity development, as I mentioned, the institutions are there, but we constantly need to develop that, and then strengthen science systems in Africa, also at a regional and a national level. And it is important that if those science systems are established and nurtured, one can also move forward. So I hope I'm within my 10 minutes, Chair, but I think the slides will probably also be available and people can comment, but I am available for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks for your perfect time control. Just exactly 10 minutes. Thank you. I think we will have the discussion later during the next section. Thanks for your point of view about Africa region, talking about a lot of the opportunity and challenge. The second talk is by IRDR National Committee Japan. Is topic about promoting coherence among the DRR, CCA, and SDG. The presenter is Hayashi Haruro, NIED president, also the member of IRDR Scientific Committee. Professor Hayashi, the floor is yours. Thank you. Hayashi, please proceed your presentation.
Sorry, I've been mute myself. Very sorry for that. Good day and good evening. Thank you for chair. Nice introduction. My name is Haruo Hayashi. I'm speaking today on behalf of National Committee, IRDR National Committee Japan. Yes, we had pre-session on May 20, and then I would like to introduce what we discussed on that evening. And this is the session structure. we had opening and 3 presentations by Japan National Committee, and followed by a panel discussion with distinguished panelists, and moderated by Professor Takara, and end up with a conclusion. I hope it moves. It stucks. Again, all right. So this is the opening. Now Japan is anticipating a very severe national crisis size disasters. And we have to be resilient enough to overcome this existential risk for our country in the first half of this century, around 2035 to be more specific. And that the 2 major events may cost more than $3 trillion US, which is very difficult for us to afford. And it is very impossible to reduce to 0. In other words, we are forced to take a very serious recovery activities to overcome these adversities. And then in this recovery process, we are hoping to make this as a chance to realize coherence among disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, as well as sustainable development goals. So we think we can do it by mobilizing 2 special weapons, I should say. One is online census system, which help us to integrate various kinds of knowledge on disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development goals, including engineers' knowledge. Thanks to advancement of ICT technology. And then second weapon is the deployment of capable facilitators on site as a catalyst to solve local problems, to convey the essence of the international expertise through online census system. And we discussed these 2 concepts in depth as a Japan National Committee, and then wrote a paper on that. And then this is the chance to introduce those 2 concepts to wide audience at the pre-session. And then before the main session, we had a very warm keynote speech from Ms. Mami Mizutori. She is a special representative to Secretary General of the UN, and then also head of DRR. She kind of endorsed that the needs of our online census system. And then it was very supporting for us. In the main session, we had 3 presentations by a member of the Japan National Committee. And the first one is introduction of a concept and application of relationship between facilitators and online systems, but especially focusing on the functions to be fulfilled by online census system. As you can see in the green boxes, there are a couple of functions to deal with the data integration tailored to local problems. And then followed by a presentation on facilitators by Professor Tamura. And she introduced the 3 main roles of facilitators. First one may be the master of ceremony or master of workshops. Second one is a catalyst to streaming up a problem-solving process on site. And then SWOT1 is a representative of the online census system to provide the needed expertise to the local solutions. And then third presenter was Professor Kawasaki, and he gave us a case study in Myanmar on how to mobilize OSS, online census system, and the facilitators. As you can see on this picture, there are two facilitators. And it is very important these two facilitators work together for the success. And then one representative representing local needs, the other facilitators representing international expertise. And by joining these two types of expertise together to solve local problem as a facilitator, and that online census system will be a great help for realizing that kind of thing. And then following those three presentations and moderated by Professor Takara, and each panelist gave us observations and impressions about OSS and facilitators based on their expertise and experiences. They are very divergent perspectives and a great help. And then follow that, Professor Takara asked to each panelist two common questions. And to make a very rich, long discussion short, we reached the conclusion like this. As our title said, the coherence among DDR, CC, and SDD is very, very important for promoting disaster resilience. And in order to do that, online census system and an on-site facilitator as a catalyst will be a great help. And then scientific committee should commit ourselves to deal with the new complex cascading systemic risks by mobilizing both online census system and facilitators. And then Japan National Committee was established in 2009, year after the IRDR started, but it was situated in Science Council of Japan. It's a highly well-recognized academic institution, but the main task is to discuss, not to act. So that we spent almost 10 years in discussing what we should do as part of IRDR. But at the end, we now prepare to continue our effort as a IRDR Japan ICOE to promote the very important concept of coherence among disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, as well as a sustainable development. In particularly East Asian region, and also in general, it's a global scale. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the end of my presentation. I'll get back to Wesen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hayashi. I think from his presentation, actually an echo to the topic we talked since yesterday, open data, open resources, and open science. I think the OSS is beyond that, is open disaster risk reduction knowledge, especially designed a good role about facilitator, which also echoed to the last mile implementation. Thank for the great contribution by IRDR Japan and Professor Hayashi. We move to the topic 3 is the ICOE, Southeast Asia Disaster Prevention Initiative. The topic today is the risk science for resilience, the city from the concept to action, focus on resilient city. And Fasha Muhammad, research fellow, will give a presentation. Fasha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. I could not share my screen yet.
Right, Sensei, I think you should stop sharing a screen so next one can share her screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are in the part of the world. I am representing the ICOE CPRI UKM to report on our pre-session on risk science for resilient cities from concept to action. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak for today and report the work that we have done in supporting the IRDR conference. So we have conducted a pre-session of IRDR conference on 7 May 2021, which actually served also as the 2020 ICOE CPRI UKM Forum. This event was convened by the IRDR ICOE CPRI, UNDRR Asia Pacific Science Technology Academia Advisory Group, APSTEC, Asian Network on Climate Science and Technology, ANS, with support from the UNESCO Youth and Young Professional Group or U-Inspired Alliance, International Science Council, Regional Office for the Asia Pacific, ISC-ROAC, and the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. The logo are reflected in the PowerPoint. This event was officiated by our Dr. Rianti, the chair of IRDR Steering Committee, and we had Professor Rajib Shaw to close the remark as a chair from APSTEC. So in this pre-session, we focus on the risk sign, where risk sign covers scientific knowledge related to development of concept, principle, approaches, method, and models for understanding, assessing, characterizing, communicating, managing, and governing risk. So this pre-session had three objectives, where we would like to promote the understanding of risk sign and the regional risk landscape in a changing climate, identify major challenges and research priorities for risk sign of cities in the region, and also explore means for implementing actions, including drawing the energy of youth and young professionals. So this event was conducted in a two-scene setting, where we had a keynote session where we invited Dr. Jayanti from the UNDRR and also Professor Chun Lee from IRDR as a speaker. And then we had an intervention from the panel experts, invited panel experts, based on the list as you can see in the PowerPoint. So briefly, our speakers, first speakers, Dr. Jayanti provided an overview of the concept and practice of risk sign, where she highlighted the need to manage the risk systematically, taking into account also interdisciplinary inputs, practitioners' knowledge and community engagement. She highlighted on the technological solutions have to be considered in tandem with societal behavior, governance, and political will as well. And as risk cannot be eliminated entirely, aspects such as living with uncertainty, perceiving opportunities in all circumstances, and enhancing resilience are actually important. And she ended her presentation with and emphasized on the importance of engaging young scientists in risk science. Professor Chun Lee, on the other hand, in his presentation on the development of the global research agenda of for DRR, he shared insight on aspect covering the need to contextualize the global science and technology roadmap, where we need a promoting science and policy dialogue for better data, advanced science and technology for DRR and resilience, as well as review the importance of hazard terminology for better communication and enhanced interdisciplinary collaboration. So in his presentation, he also call for a paradigm shift in disaster risk management by investing in risk prevention, living with uncertainty and managing on the uncertainty instead of focusing only on the disaster management and disaster response. So from the forum, from the discussion, everyone come to a consensus on the regional risk landscape where urbanization is very important in the Asia Pacific, and it should be key element considered in risk management and risk reduction. So thermal stress, extreme rainfall, and all other pollutions that influence in urbanization. So city experience shock and stress, and the impact of extreme event on city is somewhat underestimated at this moment. So in addition to that, city, based on the discussion, offers great potential for innovation. Risk and innovation play an important role to make the city more resilient. And a call from the discussion was made to for a resilient city as a key pillar in the global research agenda to address urban health issue, risk governance, and the urban-rural partnership. This will also ensure that science and technology advice is channeled correctly to cities and sub-national level to meet the aspiration of SFDR. So from this forum, there are several major challenges and research priorities were also proposed. Making cities resilient should be a cross-cutting pillar for all different teams that are already in the draft of global research agenda. So extreme weather science has to be advanced. Knowledge advancement on complex and compounding disaster risk should be a priority. And like I mentioned previously, urban health is a very hot topic now, but it shouldn't be only within this pandemic, but it should be for the longer term. The urban-rural partnership and linkages is also important, where especially in the context of resource sustainability. And we come to a consensus where measuring risk in cities, such as earthquake and ways to reduce it, but with governance and technology is some kind of aspect that requires improvement. And not to forget, population mobility and social structures changes arising from sudden onset and slow onset event due to climate change is said to be a key concern in this discussion. And then fostering multi-stakeholders collaboration for solution to risk challenges is important thematic priority, and there is growing need for increasing integration research from different fields and understanding the risk reduction, climate change for comprehending the risk. There is also need to push more openness in terms of data by government, at least the availability to researchers. Multi-stakeholder collaboration offer pathways for addressing challenges to achieve openness in data sharing between researchers and government as well as community. So this means that promoting better data sharing should be a priority. And region-based collaboration also offer effective pathways for addressing distinctive mixes of hazard, exposure, and vulnerabilities to support the knowledge generation for policy and action. And some final major challenges and research priorities that been brought forward during the discussion was the importance of enhancing understanding and disclosure to decision makers, including uncertainty that I mentioned just now associated with the projection for risk specifically is important. So how do we make better probability forecast or explains its limitation? It's simply by acknowledging the limits of model, and it's important this call for risk assessment from different lenses to find a better solution. Minimizing the gap between science in the journal and science that is made operational is also important, as well as the original notion of the IRDR to have much better understanding of the complex and underlying causes of the risk has to maintain, with more emphasis on improving decision and policy making that is scientifically sound, with taking into account the social and human dimension. In this context, a priority area in risk science as an enabler of transformative governance and actions to reduce risk. So there are means of implementing actions were pointed out toward the ends of the discussion. It was pointed out that education is extremely important, and there is need to strengthen capacity in regional modeling. So science and technology advice need to be brought forward to the local government at the city, because political decision normally will impact the local level. For example, it will affect the pensioners, children, and the prospect of youth and young professionals, in fact. And the role of youth, of young people in the local community, where the young people could bridge the gap between scientific research, action, and policy in the next decade. And the research agenda could be co-designed to be co-delivered together by young scientists. So the potential of youth and young professionals contributing to risk science in the Asia Pacific as a major point of discussion in this event. The enthusiastic of youth and young scientists of U-Inspire, if you all know it, pledge to strengthen the sub-regional efforts. For instance, at this moment, an intention was expressed to form the U-Inspire with strong linkages with ASEAN and contribute to the changing risk landscape in Southeast Asia. The full report from this event can be retrieved from the conference web. I think that's pretty much from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sasha, for your good description about the challenge and solution. I think nowadays we not just emphasize evidence-based disaster risk reduction, we also want to find solution, no matter to the government or to the citizen. Especially you mentioned about the city resilience. I think that's also a very important issue under IRDR. So we move to the next topics. We will have the Emily Zhang, actually director of ICOE, a collaborating center for Oxford University with the HKNU. So his topic today is the last frontier and application of the health emergency disaster risk management within the scope of COVID-19. I think very important issue, not just mention about the natural disaster, also about the public health issue. The floor is yours, Emily.
Yes, thank you, Professor Lee. Let me start by making sure the thing works. Can you hear me?
Yes, clear, and
okay,
also
good,
clear about your presentation. Thank you.
So you can see the PowerPoint as well, I hope. Okay, let me start with thank you. Appreciate everyone's good presentation. Now it's my turn. I belong to the ICOE CCOUC, which is one of the many good, hopefully, contributor to this whole platform. Let me just make sure it doesn't. I have some problems with my PowerPoint. Okay. We are one of the ICOE. Our focus is focusing on health and DRL. We organized, together with partners, one of the pre-session for this particular conference on April the 19th. There are many aspects of the conference which I want to highlight, but I will just summarize it later with a couple of slides. But importantly, during the particular event, we have 90 participants with panelists in the conference include Professor Rajib Shah and also myself and a few other colleagues. But because I just want to try my best to explain to you what we have discussed. Let me dive into a few key aspects of how health it's being discussed as an angle of DRL within COVID. A number of attendees, of this meeting probably is aware that health is an important integrated part, but there is this important platform. We call it the Health Emergency Disaster Risk Management Framework. It's a research and policy framework that was developed by WHO. In 2019, it was published. So I encourage anyone to look this up on the internet. And it's an important framework because it's umbrellaed. Almost all aspects, or comprehensive aspects of how, if you put people in the center of emergency disaster risk management, And health is an action and also a reaction of all this risk management. It talks about the top down and bottom up. So it's a big framework. And as an ICOE, CCOUC actually, we will consider ourselves as a chaperone or as someone, or a group that was trying to promote the related research and policy agenda. It's a research group that was formed within WHO as a global thematic network research group. I guess yesterday we have another panelist, Virginia Murray, was one of the co-chair with myself that was trying to promote and push this particular agenda with the support of WHO. A few colleagues must be in the audience, Ryoma and a few others like Jonathan and Pusia. The important thing is that, since 2016 or 17, we actually have after the framework, we actually have been standard framework. We have been talking about what are the research needs, but perhaps among many, as highlighted in this Lancet article, as ICOU have published with our partners, we understand that as health, we always work in a silo. We don't work very multidisciplinary. So there's a major multidisciplinary gaps that needs to be filled. How sectors work together, how terminology can cross-breed. So we have no idea. And as a result, we actually map up a range of agenda. And as an ICOE, we have been trying to build our research, our policy, and our projects with partners to fulfill this field gap since 2016. And using, a very important aspect which Virginia highlighted importantly for the health sector, the classification has always been an issue, especially if we work in a multidisciplinary platform. She must have talked about this a lot, but I just want to highlight this one of the angle and one of the agenda in health. This time with COVID, however, it becomes easier because it's a pandemic. Every corner of the world is affected. And as we know, it's not just, a regular condition. It's actually a biological hazard that is still ongoing as we were to speak. And as a result, with COVID, aside from the definition, it gives us a better appreciation globally how biological hazards from the health side may be relevant when most of the time risk hazards always focus on the physical, like earthquakes and floods. Now we actually have an important case everyone is interested. The other thing is the picture of the pattern. I think with COVID, one important aspect of terminology that comes up many times for the past, 2 days is the idea of a protracted crisis. Because as we know, many communities in the world, around the world, it's already the fourth or even fifth wave of pandemic. I guess one thing being highlighted during the April 19th pre-conference session and many other meetings that happens for the past, few months is the non-linear transition of biological hazards. We always assume, we build models, we do research, we do policy that assuming things will finish, will end. It is not. And as a result, with a non-linear modeling, we have to revisit all the assumptions. And there's now, updates, discussion, research work that focus on that. But there's still a huge gap about how, with the non-linear nature of it, how multidisciplinary actors can play together. And for that, the other aspects that we also try to play with other actors in social science, social work, and legal, framework is that, we also are interested in care providing, because it's on the health side. For instance, again, as a group, with ICOE in health, we actually work with many partners to look at how during COVID, the important case is informal care providers. What's happened? Governments assume things will take care of itself by informal care provider. We know there's a gap. This is an article published by Lancet, which we talk about during the pre-conference section. And with that, we actually changed practice because it's about knowledge to action. We changed the original home care, version, which was developed by WHO in March 17 to an update version because we have new data. We work with social scientists to look at the patterns of what's being done, what are the gaps, what exactly it's the wrong assumptions that was made. So that is a small contribution. As a multidisciplinary group, we managed to push changes of guidelines developed by WHO. Further on, of course, the multi-sectorial involvement is important. I think together with the panelists, other panelists on Rajiv, there is a number of good conferences that happens for the past few months because of COVID. One of them is to look at, how this Asia Pacific Science and Technology Conference, look at how multi-sectorial involvement can be manifest, okay, rather than just talking. We want to push it into some action. This is a very good report done by Rajiv's team, and it was wonderful because it actually maps out the biological hazards with DRR planning. We as health side, we contribute by sharing our perspective from anywhere from how sectors interact. We don't even have that map. We talk about it all the time. okay, how latest information technology communication may be of some use. So, and we look at how risks are being assessed from a health perspective, that we're using terminology that both health and other sectors will understand. Okay, so this is active developed. So during the conference, we talk about, like, I mean, or the pre-sessions, we talk about the risk assessment, the challenges. Again, we're happy to share the report, but this is just to highlight. I guess the other important frontier is that from the health side, how do we play in to support the multidisciplinary actions? Because one of the challenge we are looking at is, again, how do we support health systems? Because health system is part of the government system that can integrate and can work together. But these are the list of multidisciplinary sectorial gaps that we have highlighted, and we have published it. I mean, as an ICOE, again, with other sectorial members, include that we need infrastructure support for health system resilience, data management, which is beyond the capacity of health sector. Health people deal with patients management, but we don't know how to approach big data, or at least very rare, because we have the capacity. We need the support. We need to work with other sectors with residual risk communication, digital literacy, and even knowledge product marketing. This is again beyond health. With that, the other important point that we highlight in the panel discussion during the pre-session is ethics. I mean, health, we talk about ethics all the time. We talk about how we support patients, but we also realize many other sectors are doing important research, but ethics is not being included because maybe sectorially they have less emphasis or less infrastructure to build in to protect the patients. Many of the times we realize research was done in the name of good for people, but there's no research being built. So the infrastructure is important. I guess the last point I want to bring up is that this is one of the latest work together again with our partners. I mean, we actually published an article at Lancet 2 days ago, and this is about bottom-up citizens engagement. We are from the health side, we are actually trying our best to learn to cross-fertilize from non-health sector, the terminologies. And even when we published this article, I mean, we got a lot of question, why are we using citizen engagement? The term itself is not very helpful from their point of view, but we think it's important. Among many things, I think the research design, okay? I mean, we are always thinking about research frontier, how that may integrate into policy and implementation has always been a problem. Okay, and the other important thing is we need to build mechanisms for multidisciplinary partnerships to analyze and co-share data, co-partner, co-design. We simply don't have that. We talk about it. So, I mean, COVID does offer a platform for us to do this kind of work. And there are articles that are coming up, but we need more support and partnerships from the non-health sector. So in summary, okay, I know that I'm 9 minutes right now. There are several things I want to conclude from our sessions, from the 90+ audience. The first thing is that we want to emphasize the importance of multi-sectoral, multi-hazard action plan. I think the plans currently, the ones who are actively engaged in this, they start out with non-multidisciplinary. People said this is not my area, this is our area. In this platform, we have to do multi-sectoral. At least when we publish paper public policy, we should work with other sectors to make sure we maximize the good. The other important thing we actually bring up is, at least during the discussion, is the reconceptualization of human health security and HEDRM to address the compound, complex, cascading, concurrent, or protracted crisis, whatever you name it. There's many new terms, but how is the theoretical framework that helps us to build things actually manage to cover it? We don't know, okay? And of course, we are very excited about technology. Thank you for the platform, for the organizer again, because without technology, we won't be able to meet online. But the adaptation of technology advancement in data collection, dissemination, and protection, the ethics of how we should do it is unknown. We need discussion. We may even need future sessions on this. And of course, last but not least, the improving of inclusivity of digital literacy. I'm not even talking about, patients or people or the enclave, even for academics. There are a lot of academics who cannot manage digital platform very well. So we actually need to ensure more simple measures and platforms to allow more engagement in that perspective. So last but not least, there are quite a number of things that are developed from health and DRL. And as an ICO, we are very proud. Last point is that there is a research guidelines, okay, developed with WHO along with many disciplines. Hopefully we will push the research methodology from health, or we share it with the non-health sector. Having said that, really done. Okay, so I'm finished. So thank you very much for the time, and please feel free to outreach to CCOUC. We're happy to talk and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I think COVID really give a test to community, both the public health and disaster manager. From Emily's talk, we found a lot of similarity between the two communities. So I think it's the starting point, how two communities work together to think more scenario to enhance the benefit of our society. Right now, we move to talk number 5, actually is by the ICOE. ICOE about the risk, interconnectivity and governance on the weather and the climate extreme impact on public health. The presenter is the Tang Xu, Executive Director of the ICOE. Mr. Tang, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good day. Ladies and gentlemen, dear experts, dear colleagues, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce a little bit of the progress of the ICOE, the IRDR, regarding to the risk in the connectivity and governance on the climate change impact and relate to the health. Next. More. Okay. There's a 5 mainstream of the research and activity of our ICOE, which focus on the climate change impact with the climate extreme, air pollution, and integrated health. And also the interdisciplinary team has been established, which consists of the experts from different departments, school, and institute, from the scientific atmospheric science, environmental science, public health, big data, and the development and governance related. So the ICOE, our ICOE also emphasizes on raising the capacity of the science in service to society. And the partnership program has been established with multi-stakeholder and also with the relevant international organization program and project. Several progress has been made in the support of the relevant international program and organization. For example, our ICOE team already actively engaged in the reviewing process of the WMO Special Task Team on MAQ, meteorological and air quality factor affecting COVID-19 in 2020 to 2021. The comments and recommendations of the ICOE were considered by the task team in its review report. 8 papers from the ICOE have been included in its reference. Several studies have been conducted on the climate and health risk. For example, this is one of the examples to show the relationship between the rapid weather variation and influenza like illness, influenza mortality. Since the rapid weather variation can exert influence on human immune system and increase risk of influenza mortality. This could be a base to establish a prediction technique or system on rapid weather variation, factor affecting influenza-like illness and its associated mortalities. This is another example to contributed by our ICOE team regarding the global impact of the PM 2.5 and associated mortality, which published in New England Journal of Medicine. 24 countries and regions include 652 cities worldwide selected, and the exposure of the aerosol particle and mortality of the citizens linked to the risk of relevant disease have been analyzed, and clear evidence from this research has been provided for WHO to set up ambitious baseline threshold on global air quality health impact in this year. And also this paper has been elected by the journal as one of the best paper in 2019. Regarding to the outcome from our two pre-sessions of the 2021 IRDR conference on climate change and One Health on April 26 and June 4 respectively, these two pre-sessions brought together top international and domestic scientists in the field of climate change, environment, ecology, and health to discuss the interconnection of climate change and One Health, including those from international organization participation and administrative labor participation, and the participation of the experts from university. Regarding to the several outcomes from these two pre-sessions are include, for example, the pre-session noting the IRDR recently put forward a research agenda, which puts forward very promising direction for comprehensive research on multiple risks in the next decade. Our pre-session expressed full support to IRDR to continue shouldering the mission of in the next 10 years. Considering the integrated health risk under the context of climate change are not specifically covered in this research agenda, the pre-session strongly recommend the integrated research risk as an important mainstream in the implementation framework of the research agenda, and I look forward to further establishment of the international research team and corresponding international program or project in this direction. The outcome from this discussion are also as follows. For example, since the agenda will guide next 10 years implementation, and 10 years is a very short time period, the mainstream of the research, global research agenda should be identified for better steering and implementation. Those mainstream could include, but not least, planetary health, because in the title of the research agenda include planetary health, and One Health in particular, building science-based resilience in a post-COVID-19 and era of the climate emergency. This issued by UN Secretary General at the end of the last year towards carbon neutrality. The combination and the complexity of the climate change and the human-induced risk, etc. And the pre-session also consider to recommend to have a strong linkage of the global research agenda with other important global agendas, such as SDG, are important. Response to the question raised the request for the global research agenda. I just highlight some of the issue or the topic or recommendation from the pre-session. For example, regarding to the changing global, regional, or national risk landscape. As we have well known, the climate change is one of the greatest threats in the 21st century. The pre-session suggests the understanding the interconnectivity of the risk associated with climate change should be an important component of the research agenda. And also, regarding to the emergence of the new risk, should be put into attention, such as the changing pattern of the weather climate extreme under the climate change background can trigger significant the new risk in operations of new renewable energy to vulnerable society. Regarding to the question on identify 3 major research priorities, based on our discussion in the 2 pre-sessions, we have considered that theme 5, theme 6, and theme 7 to be 3 major research priorities. In addition, the pre-session also strongly recommend there should be a new strategy to strengthen the communication between government sector, enterprises, and the research institute, and to promote development of the risk informing application. Regarding to the implementation of the agenda science in action, the pre-session has recommend to set up an expert group for each of the themes, which also should be supported by relevant mainstream, such as emerging new technology, data revolution, planetary health, including health ecosystem, and One Health issue, etc.
Professor Tom, 1 minute left.
Okay. Regarding to the other suggestion and recommendation on the research agenda, also include involving of the enterprises, a special part of the addressing interconnection with the risk, and also solution-driven approaches should be also considered in support of the science-based decision-making. This photo show something during the 2 pre-sessions. For example, the chairman of the IPCC provides the important lecture, climate change and the impact. And the director of the UNEP science department also gave an important lecture on making peace with nature. And the representative from ISC also introduced the important topic on opportunity of international scientific collaboration and a panel discussion, several panel discussion. Dr. Virginia Murray also introduced her the recent work regarding to the hazard associated with climate change and the WHO Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Network. Academician Guo Huadong also introduced the big data for sustainable development goals. Finally, the chair of the forum and also the pre-sessions also announced his advocacy as the chair's advocacy to show the outcome and a recommendation from these 2 pre-sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tang, for your detailed explanation about development of the ICOE on public health and consider climate change and its impact. Thank you very much. Because of time, I should move to the last presentation today. The last present also about the pre-section hosted by ANSO DRR. Professor Gretchen Kolonji, the floor is yours. Please share your things with our IRDR participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to join you. Greetings to colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in your various time zones. I'm very happy to see many old friends and to have a chance to briefly share what happened in our pre-session. Let me try and share my screen. Okay, you have the screen now. Let me see if I can be smart enough to make it go to full screen. How's that? Looking good? Okay, great. So first of all, it's really delightful to be in such a stimulating community and hearing all these wonderful talks. Of course, being the last speaker, the danger always is that so many points have already been made, but I noticed some of the points that we want to make have not yet been made. But let me begin by acknowledging my partner in this endeavor, Professor Tsui Peng. from the Institute of Mountain Hazards and Environment of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He and I co-chair this event, but we are also co-directors of this ENSO DRR effort. So my first slide basically is to give you a little bit of an idea about what ENSO DRR is. And interestingly, this slide came from our opening session, our first meeting, which took place in May of 2019 in conjunction with the Silk Road Disaster Risk Conference in Beijing. And I think it illustrates well our vision at the time. And what's fascinating to me is that many of the themes that we identified as important for our alliance remain core to our agenda. And there's a big overlap with the priorities of the new agenda for IRDR. Of course, there's not a total overlap. There's some aspects that we feature that are not featured and vice versa. But I think it remains a key vision of what we're trying to do with this alliance of international science organizations on disaster risk reduction. But what is this thing? What is this strange beast? I should tell you a little bit about it, because unlike the other presentations that preceded me, we're not International Center of Excellence of IRDR, nor a national committee. But of course, we have very close relationships with the IRDR network. So basically, the ENSO DRR was created under the umbrella of a broader initiative of the Chinese Academy of Sciences called ENSO, the Alliance of International Science Organizations. And that was founded by the Chinese Academy of Sciences in 2018 as an ambitious effort to link science academies and science research institutions in Belt and Road countries, both in the maritime routes and the land-based routes. And so what ENSO did is ENSO very thoughtfully called for thematic projects among ENSO-related institutions. And Professor Cui Peng and I were fortunate enough to get one to focus on ENSO DRR. So let's see. So the membership of ENSO DRR is very diverse. You know, we have about 30 members up until now. And as you can see, predominantly in Asia, but some in Europe, some international associations, and quite a few in China. What's unusual about ENSO DRR compared to many international networks is that there's a lot of representation of academies of sciences, which is logical because it was founded by the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And ENSO originally was mostly an alliance of academies of sciences. But in addition, there's research institutes and numbers of universities. So it's very strongly academic, but also connections with governmental agencies and with academies. I think that's a very interesting organizational structure and potentially very powerful in terms of science policy interface. So our session was different from most of the other sessions that have been described so far, in that what we decided to do was to have more of a small group brainstorming session to promote dialogue instead of, there were no lectures or presentations. So the participants were primarily, but not exclusively, from from the steering committee of ENSO DRR. And I'm going to share with you some of the comments from the group. Of course, I can't cover all of them. There was a lot of rich insight and wisdom that came from the group, but I'm going to cluster the comments into two main categories. In general, the group is very, very strongly supportive of the new research agenda. The group recognizes the importance of the real contributions that IRDR made in its first 10 years. And also is very, very enthusiastic and strongly supportive of the need for continued work of IRDR in the next 10 years. So we made some comments which are echoed which echo many of the previous comments. And the majority of the comments that I will put forward, I won't read them all because of time and because you can read faster than I can speak, but I will make some key points. After the set of comments in which we basically agree with the report, but might have a little bit of a different twist on a few things, I'm going to put forward a couple of things a couple of issues that we felt are actually missing or insufficiently represented in the current agenda. And so we would encourage them to receive more focus in the future. So just to begin, of course, we obviously agree with the urgency of more effectively addressing the increasingly complex research agenda. One component is the importance of linking the natural sciences and natural and engineering sciences and disaster risk with the health communities. And of course, that's been pointed out by Emily Chan just now and Tang Xu just now. But from our point of view, from the experience within ANSO-DRR, it's important to recognize the diversity of the elements of the health community that needs to be addressed, that needs to be incorporated. So of course, it's not just public health, but the emergency medicine, nursing is incredibly important, disaster mental health, disaster epidemiology, et cetera. So the connections between the natural science, social science, and engineering and the health communities are really, really broad and multifaceted and important for the work of ANSO-DRR, and we believe also worldwide. We echo the comments of Tang Xu about the need to focus on the relations of climate change to disasters. And a lot of our community, because basically we start from China and then go west all the way to Italy among our membership, and also Southeast Asia. So it's really, really important to understand that the variation of the impact of climate change on disaster formation and triggering of disasters and the movement of disasters, particularly with extreme weather events on regions with different terrains. So again, our group very, very strongly pushed for the open science and open data, like I think everyone else had, and also creating open resources for better solutions. The people-centered approaches to local community engagement was a very strong theme among many of our, the comments of many of our people. The phrase of DRR social innovation ecosystems needs to be an important part of the new research agenda. I thought was very, very important. Our group had a strong focus also on the equity and access and justice issues, and placed a very strong emphasis on gender equity, which hasn't been mentioned very much so far this evening. Again, on the topics that we largely concur with the agenda, the importance of youth and young professionals. I really strongly agree with our colleague from Siatri about the You Inspire is a very powerful platform. You Inspire, for those of you who don't know it, was started in Indonesia, but now has 12 chapters in Asia, and many of the countries that are part of the ANSO-DRR agenda, and about 1,000 young researchers, extremely powerful. So it's important that we not only involve youth and young professionals in our individual programs, but also we support their organizations and develop their leadership capacity and their ability to contribute to the policy agenda, because they have powerful roles to play in the knowledge to action business. Again, like everyone else said, we need to have these collaborative multi-sectoral mechanisms. But lastly, among the things that we basically agree upon, given that ANSO-DRR is really a very multinational initiative, we recognize very strongly the importance of new models for transnational, transdisciplinary collaborations. And this must include the funding mechanisms, because there's a huge disparate access to funding, and we need new models for that. Developing these new models and evaluating these new models is a really important part of the agenda, the new research agenda. So those are the things that we basically agreed upon. I have a couple of things that we think still need to be added or receive enhanced focus in the new research agenda. So one is the importance of engineering. So when we talk about, solution science, going to solutions, et cetera, without strong involvement of the engineering community, it's just not feasible. And though the agenda has a section, priority 6, on harnessing technologies, it only really talks about digital technologies, AI, social media, et cetera. Of course, that's very important. Of course, we have to harness this. But we should not forget the other engineering topics, of course, design of disaster resilient infrastructure, new engineering standards in times of uncertainty, but engineering is all over the place, chemical engineering for solving the NATEC related disasters. Without more broad involvement of the engineering communities, we're just not going to maximize our progress. And I must say that also with respect to engineering, the engineering communities include not only the academic and the research sections, but the private sector and the practitioners and the engineering professional societies. So innovations in engineering education will be very, very important. And so lastly, I just wanted to say that speaking of innovations in education, we believe that the innovations in the higher education sector should be more prominently featured in the research strategy. Because after all, that's where a preponderance of the research takes place in many countries and regions. And of course, that's where the young researchers are educated and trained. So we need to get started early in working on models in which students at very young ages work with professors in multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral teams on concrete projects. And we can also be ambitious and have these projects be multinational, because if we don't tackle change in our higher education system, we will not maximize our ability to deliver on this research agenda. So in summary, thank you for your patience and listening to me as the last speaker in this session. And I just wanted to stress again that the ANSO DRR group really strongly endorses the basic elements of the new research agenda, and we will be very active participants. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kolonji. I think I like your point, how to design a better curriculum for a future researcher and disaster manager. My background, I'm a civil engineer, major in earthquake engineering, but in the last 17 years, I have to increase my domain knowledge to accommodate the different disasters. I think since last year, I have put my focus on public health. So I think your idea is great, how to design a better higher education for a future researcher and disaster manager. Thank you, and thanks for all 6 prominent speakers for the wonderful and informative speech. In the following, I will ask Randy to take my place to lead the discussion in the following. Randy, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Weisenli, for this opportunity to then listen, I think, to some of the discussion results of the meetings and conferences by the 6 presenters. I honestly, I think I feel sorry for the rapporteurs. There are so many great ideas, excellent ideas, and I will not try to summarize it now, but I'll leave it later for my summary part, and also for rapporteurs to report tomorrow. And I think let's use this opportunity to give time for the participants of the conference to, I think, to ask questions, to clarify, introduce yourself, whether you agree, you have any additional comments to make, and I think I would welcome your question in this part. In terms of time, I think we can have around 20 to 25 minute discussion, which we would welcome. I think you're welcome. We welcome your comments, suggestions, and so on. We have also, I have also monitored the chat function and the Q&A. Maybe let's start from there. If we haven't you are welcome to raise your question, raise your hand so we can give you the time and floor to ask question. I may start here on the question here, 5 open questions, I think, I think any of the presenters, from Nico from Africa, from Professor Hayashi from Japan, Dr. Pasha from UKM, and then also here Professor Tang Xu from Fudan University, Emily from HKU, and then also the one and only Professor Gretchen. Welcome to ask questions also here. So let me read one of the first question here from Olufemi. As one of the IRDR young scientists, I'm interested to become more active in the research team. So how can I have this opportunity from all of you here? Also, the second question from Mia Meli. If it's about leaving local communities, not leaving local community behind, and he see a widening gap between local communities and experts. How do you see that can be, close, this gap can be closed? Another question from Dr. Norbert on the interface of science and policy. It remains an issue, particularly in the global South. How do you address this issue? Last question here from Maurice. I think it's probably related to Hayashi Sensei presentation. Did you organize a pool of facilitator on this, or do you have facilitator or representative in different countries? So maybe let's start from here. Welcome any of the presenters to respond to this, or if you have comments, and then while we wait for more questions from the participant. So welcome presenters to respond any of this question. Okay, may I call, maybe let's start from the first presenter, Professor Nico, if you would like to take any of the question, and we go along the order of the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Rihanti. I was looking for my hand signal so that I can respond to some of the questions, but you were just too quick for me. So thank you for the opportunity. Maybe just, if I may, respond to the question or the comment around the interfacing with science and policy. And I made the comment very briefly in my presentation about this. There's always this gap, and there's sometimes even a tension between research and science, and bridging the gap. So that's obviously a research field almost on, but it is on its own. And there's been a lot written about how do we bridge the gap. And I think research that has come out in the recent past is this notion of productive interactions. But what that basically means is that the researchers are often guilty of embarking on research. They do it on their own. Obviously, they do engage certain stakeholders along the way, but for various reasons, they work a little bit on their own. And what the research says is that if you embark on these productive interactions with various stakeholders throughout the process, even when you start identifying a problem, or at the very, very early stages, and you walk a path along the various stakeholders, not just decision makers, but society and everybody, and you have these productive interactions, it really leads to a very higher probability of impact in terms of policy and decision making. So that's maybe just something that I want to put on the table. It's something that we as research can learn from. And even when we design our research and our activities and our capacity development, that we embark on this process of constantly engaging and feeding from our various stakeholders, and in order to have a better probability of impact at the end of the day in our research and our activities. So thank you very much, Rihanti. Good to see you again.
Yes, thank you, Professor Elema. Then maybe let me catch this notion of productive interaction and then move to Professor Hayashi. Do you think facilitators can allow for this productive interaction? And I think maybe from what you presented, how do you see then these facilitators may then help to engage or even close the gap between north and south, south to south, close the gap between local, regional, and local, regional, and international. So welcome, Professor Hayashi.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the very capable facilitator will be key to connect science and policy, and science and practice. And it could be very, very useful and powerful in solving a great problems. But so far, the facilitator tend to be more of arts rather than science. So it's more like depend on idiosyncratic nature of the particular person in dealing with the local problems. But at our proposal, using fostering facilitators supported by online synthesis system will, in a sense, standardize the quality of the facilitators to help solving a local problems. We believe that all the problems happens and should be solved on site. And then in order to do that, it is very important to have very rich and good understanding of what's going on site. At the same time, it is important to have ample and wide range of knowledge to be deployed as a solutions for those local problems. And then if we ask any individual to fulfill that function, that might be very, very hard work for each individual. But by applying those advancement of IC technologies, especially these days that we could have automatic transformation capability very high, so that if we could put our own language stuff, and it could be translated into English. It is a quasi word common language, which that spoke by most widely. And then translated into another local language. And that may not be a perfect, but it could function as a fast approximation. That's hint or empower that local facilitators to deal with the local issues they are facing. By that way, so I should kind of emphasize like a human touch in dealing with science and social problem issues, or science and policy issues, or academia practitioner issues. It has to be like a human as a catalyst to bring these to rather different district sectors together. And then helped by such a online system, anyone who are interested in or willing to take such kind of capacity will be potentially very capable facilitators. That's a kind of a proposal we wanted to do. I know it's a long way to go, but I think the direction is good.
Okay, thank you, Hayashi Sensei, for the responses. Then I think I will move to the next theme that were that is frequently raised in the Q&A section here. It's about data. So data as decision making, how far data can be used as a significant tool for decision. And also here, how can we expand our agenda with innovation towards more innovative practices rather than one-off action, and also the role of indigenous knowledge in global risk agenda. So how can they are not scientifically proved, but people have been practicing all the time. So maybe then let me call Professor Gretchen and also Dr. Fasha to make a response on some of the issue raised on data, on technology, innovation. And I think from your two presentations, the role of youth probably later on, by which you can help to strengthen, for example, innovation in strengthening our research and science. So Professor Gretchen, welcome, and Dr. Fasha also welcome. So two great colleagues of mine that thank you very much for your great presentation.
Thank you, Riyanti. I think I'd just like to make a few comments about innovation, and they will link to my previous comments about the need for innovations in higher education. When we get young students into the university, they're very creative and they don't know yet what they can't do. And so if they get started at a very early age, even at freshman level or at the sophomore level, and are given big challenges to work on in teams, interdisciplinary challenges, we can promote their innovative capacity very, very early, and also connect them with other partners in society. So as a university educator with a passion for helping kids get creative and unleash their potential, I think that's the best place to get started on innovation.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Gretchen. Maybe Dr. Fasha, can you respond to the role of youth, innovation, and maybe some responses on data on how it can strengthen disaster risk science on the issue that you have mentioned from your presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Riyanti. So I'm going to respond to that two questions. So I'm going to with the issue of data sharing first. As what I presented in my presentation just now, the importance of the need to push for more openness in terms of data, because even us in CP, we in promoting the open source data. This is because when we conducting a research, there's a difference when you are using the restricted data and you are using the open source data, where when we are using the open source data, we are able to share our finding with the community. So that's the point. For example, we are producing landslide susceptibility map with open source data, that the best available sign that we had. So we have no restriction to share the findings to the public, because community need to know. They are one of the important stakeholders. Community need to know the what are their stage. Are they living in the underlying risk that might risk their family, themselves. So that's the important of one of the important aspect that why we pushing for the openness data. For the youth and young scientists, I could respond to the first question from our participant. Probably we could start with the existing group that is well known now, like Alliance of Youth and Young Professional, which is called You Inspire Alliance, where we currently have like 20 countries with members close to 1,000. This maybe for the first step, probably this participant could reach out to their national chapters if there's any, but there is none national chapters in their country. There's an opportunity for the development of a new you inspire national chapters. So this is important because we are not working alone. We are working in under the same umbrella with same powerful vision to empower youth and young professionals in DRR. And besides, I just wanted to share, like in my presentation, I have highlighted about the strong linkages that you inspire now try to move forward with the ASEAN. Like for example, yesterday my colleague presented like make pledge in the ASEAN meeting where we would like to, you know, move further with this initiative. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Dr. Fasha. And I think I would then ask the two presenters, Professor Emily and Professor Tang, I think on the relationship on health, disaster risk, climate change, planetary health, One Health. I think these are some of the topics that I heard quite common from your two presentation. So Professor Emily, I think, and also Professor Tang, you also have shown, you know, how the interaction, multidisciplinarity by which the research is done, and also like I think a very strong outputs that you have produced from you know, this collaboration. Maybe Professor Emily and Professor Tang, can you share some of the knowledge in the process of creating, developing, and the research, but also then producing results, and to what extent the results from your research on have influenced policy making and implementation yeah, locally and practically. So maybe we welcome Professor Emily first, then Professor Tang.
Okay, thank you, Rayanti. I appreciate that. And I will go first, Professor Tang, if you allow me. I guess, from the very brief 10 minutes, I was trying to share, like, a range of things that our ICOE was trying to work on. In fact, platforms such as what we have right now, this meeting, is very precious for multidisciplinary actors to talk. Many of the times, my team, my researchers, and my colleagues actually come to this kind of meetings to pick up terminologies that was known or well known in other sectors and bring it back to the health sector for integration and further development. And sometimes, even conceptually, we seem to talk about the same thing, but it's not. So what I was trying to highlight is that if for young scientists, which we really treasure a lot because it's about the future of science, the future generation, I think this platform, it's no doubt, is very important because it does hopefully inspire some younger scientists, some researchers to pick up the topic and run with it, as we always highlighted. Because in the old ways, people do their research, their area, they have to ensure that it was accepted by their disciplines before they can venture out. We still believe in such, rigor in terms of developing a good, rigorous science outcomes. But still, in order to address the problems that we're dealing with in disaster risk, resilience, and a lot of other good work, it does require cross-disciplinary, both from borrowing of measures, borrowing of methodologies, and even integrating the aspects. I think when I was mentioning about our work, one of the case in point, it's the informal care provider. Again, in health, we naturally assume that we will look for the solutions for diagnosis, for treatment, for management of a case, of a patient, in attempt to save life. But then that, of course, with COVID, we can tell that we are looking for the right vaccine, right treatment, and the right way to screen patients. Having said that, many of the times we just assume things will happen in a black box. And when it comes to the informal care provider discussion, which happens last year, many countries, policymakers were going to say, okay, the system is going to collapse very soon. So assuming informal care providers could take care of the problem. And health people just assume that way as well, because they have to focus on patients who actually need inpatient care. But then during that time, when we were talking to other social scientists, other people that are working with the community in the front line, we realized it's not working. Because there's simply so much that there's very limited resources in beyond healthcare setting. So we have to map that, and we managed to actually highlight evidence, and also we're trying to look at the patterns of care or the risk associated with patterns of care, And the research outcomes actually are being replicated in many parts of the world because each country will have its own culture, its own practices, and you have to readapt it. And as a result, a lot of case studies that was produced, supported by the NGO, will help us to look at the evidence. And from scientists, public health, social scientists, legal, many aspects. We put together the case and we managed to convince WHO to update its guidance. It was not supposed to be, it was supposed to be on the agenda of the list of things they have to update because of the momentum gained. It was actually, quite a feat to make it happen. So what I'm trying to highlight is that I think, despite this is a very wide so-called science platform, it does take, I guess, determination, some leadership, and young people to take, to pick up an aspect or build the aspect. So I think it's a very exciting environment, and definitely look forward to work with different disciplines more. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Emily. And I will go to Professor Tang Xu of Fudan University to also respond. So welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much, Rianti. Gave me the opportunity to provide further comment. Regarding to the, I like the background of the Hiyachi-san, Science for Resilience. Then what the specific issue on scientific issue for the new agenda? That's a risk interconnection. Risk interconnection to show the support of the Sendai framework to sustainable development goal, and to support in support of Paris Agreement, to show, to identify the risk in the connection. These are the advantage or priority from our research agenda, from IRDR program. So in this regard, I think very important for the next step is we need to strengthen our multidisciplinary collaboration mechanism. We need to focus on this issue. We need to establish an interdisciplinary team, international team. I also called for to establish an expert group for each of the team. I think that's important. There's one special mechanism, collaboration mechanism, for the further implementation of the research agenda. The second one, the multi-stakeholder partnership. Since the new feature of the risk interconnectivity for better governance in a global governance structure, multi-stakeholder partnership are very, very important mechanism for the next step for the further implementation of the research agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tang, for the responses. And I think it brings us very well in terms of time and also a topic to close our discussion today. So if I can summarize our discussion in one sentence, I think we need complex approaches and solutions to deal with the increasingly complex problems that we have, and we need involvement by many people. So I will stop at that, and then we will put our summary of the discussion tomorrow. And may I welcome also Dr. Weisenli, if you would like to offer your concluding remarks before we close, and also close the event. So welcome, Dr. Weisen.
I think to do research or implementation of disaster risk reduction, we always have the learning curve. I think today we advanced the curve, but in the following we should do together. Thank you very much. Thank you for all presenters and all participants today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then may we return it to the moderator, Professor Chung Lee, if you would like to close the session for day 2 today.
Thank you, Rianti. Thank you, Dr. Weisen. Excellent report from dear colleagues that you have organized such a great processions. I think this is extremely important that we have this session after the key main session 2, which introduced the research agenda, because that is the purpose of the processions, to have together as much as we can the scientific input, the ideas for implementation toward the new research agenda. I'm sure your contributions have been taken up by the project team that make the research agenda. But at the same time, your advice, your recommendations, ideas have been widely distributed to the IRDR community. So we will all benefit in advancing our agenda. So this is a tremendous thanks from IPO to you all. And tomorrow, we will close this session. Thank you, Rianti, thank you, Wilson, and Gretchen, Harashi, Professor Harashi, everybody, Emily, sorry for the troubles, and Emma and Fasha for your excellent report. So this session is closed. Just before you leave, tomorrow evening, tomorrow UTC, 11 o'clock, same time, that we will have the third day 3 for the keynote session 2, the knowledge in actions. So tomorrow we will first start talking about the actions, not just ideas. We have to see how we are going to address the IRDR, the challenge facing by the IRDR into the real actions. Then we will have a keynote session 3, then challenges and opportunities. So we will hear from the views from the IIC's recent international forum for the science founders, and also hear from the private sectors and the insurance companies. And there will be a lot of comments and suggestions for tomorrow. So we then follow that is the closing session. We will hear a recap of all the rapporteurs. They are all young scientists, give us a brief report back on what we have covered in these 3 days of the conference. Then the closing remarks by the conference sponsors, IIC, UNDR, and the CAST. With this, I wish you all a good day, a good evening, good night, and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.